Right now, with that election date pushed out, of course, into a budget period, focus is back on the Treasurer, the very ambitious Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. Budget's due now on the 25th of May. Just this morning, the Australian reported the PM's preferred election date of April 12 was so set in stone that many senior ministers and advisors had taken a pretty perfunctory approach to budget meetings, even putting off major decisions. Well, now it's back on. I reckon there was a few public servants choking on their Chardonnay on Friday night. They all had to get back in the office on the weekend and help put together a budget which will be a sea of red ink. We know that now. So given our budget footing, will the Treasurer show restraint in a fortnight's time, or is he going to spend up big to try and buy your vote? Joining me now, our business editor, Ross Greenwood. Now, I don't think he thought he would be delivering that budget. I don't think either of us, Ross, thought Jim Chalmers would deliver this budget. But here he is. You pointed out this yesterday on your show. I thought it's worth putting this up for people at home. The government's deficit from the year to January is already at $37 billion. Now, that's a big blowout from what they promised back in May last year. So restraint or vote buying? Ross, what sort of budget are you expecting?
It seems this government only knows one way to go, and that is to try and buy votes. If you think about the budget last year, they had about $38 billion in a contingency reserve. Well, since the beginning of this year, they've spent most of that contingency reserve. Now, we're not the only ones spending, because quite clearly Peter Dutton doing the same thing, because there's the nuclear policies, plus also the Medicare proposal that the Prime Minister put up, which was $8.5 billion, was pretty much instantly matched by the coalition. But the reality is that this goes down as one of the biggest spending governments that Australia has seen in many years. The thing that is hard for the government to really convince people about with this is at a time when people are having to really tighten their own belts because of the cost of living crisis, which has been largely manufactured by the government, they are doing exactly the opposite. So in other words, it's not a matter of do as I do as I say. It's the fact that the people are seeing a government that every time the Prime Minister turns up somewhere is offering people who are not going to be left behind an extra couple of $1 billion, at the same time that the ordinary people who might vote for that government are saying, well, hang on, things are tough. And one reason why things are so tough, Peter, is because the government's tax take has been so high. So don't imagine this as the supermarkets or the insurance companies. Yes, that's it at the edge. But the real reason why the cost of living crisis has happened is because the government's bracket creep has taken so much out of people's pockets that they've been able to spend because they've got so much money coming through the door. Since January this year, the government spent $35 billion just this year. We're not even halfway through the year. Let's assume they're going to spend in pretty hard come the budget and try and buy their way to power back in May. I guess my concern is, what does this do in terms of inflationary risk? And secondly, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't we now under the new regime where there will be a different body to set the interest rate or the official cash rate? And are we going to see that play into the Treasurer's thinking? Yep, they start in April, so that's the new body. So as a result, they'll be looking at not just inflation, but also at employment as the key benchmarks. They kind of are already doing this, to be fair. But the reality is that when it comes to interest rates in the future, this has been set by the government, of course, is to try and make certain that there's some notion of full employment. Now, you only ever see what full employment is in hindsight, but you know at 4.1%. The reason why the government has got so much money right now, and they're spending more than what's coming through the door, is largely because of so many PAYG workers, many more than what have been forecast. So the unemployment rate has not drifted out to 4.5%. It stayed at 4.1%. Now, 50% of the government's money comes from those PAYG workers. And so from that point of view, yes, they've got lots of money coming through the door. It'll be offset a bit by falling commodity prices, which do hurt the budget. But here's the reality of this. The Treasurer did not expect to give a budget. And so as a result, many of the announcements that the Prime Minister's come up with would be things that would normally be announced in the budget. But because they're already announced, what's the Treasurer going to announce? So I'm going to tell you, this is going to take the very best
of Jim Chalmers' noted communication skills to be able to sell this budget. Because the reality that people are going to see, and we'll see it as soon as the budget comes down, is more debt, what it looks like over 10 years. We'll hear from the credit ratings agencies. And so as a result, this is going to be a very big sell ahead of an election, because basically people will see the state of the spending and indeed the state of the taxing of individuals that will be coming at the same time.
Yeah, the political point Ross is making there is all the good news has been sold out by the Prime Minister. Yep. The poor Treasurer's got to deliver the bad news. The bad news is basically all you really hear before he calls it on, before he announces the campaign. That's not the sort of footing you like to have. That would have been something that was buried until the detail comes out halfway through the election campaign, and it's pretty paltry detail, but we'll see it all in a full budget in 2 weeks' time. Hey, just before you go, Kevin Hassett, he's one of Donald Trump's top advisors. Yeah. He has downplayed the prospect that we might get this exemption on tariffs. Where are we up to here, Ross?
I think you've got to absolutely believe what that man is saying. And the reason for that is, for what reason would Donald Trump give Australia an exemption? Now, the reality is, he says we'll do it where we're not being taxed on the other side. But the reality is, if you have a look at the people who have got Donald Trump's ear right now are the big tech moguls. Where have the big tech moguls been taken on head on by any country? Australia. And so as a result, if you think that we're going to get an exemption when they're in his ear telling him about the treatment that they've received from the Australian government, I'd suggest to you that Donald Trump isn't going to give too many favours to Australia, notwithstanding the significant surplus that the United States has with Australia. So, as I say, don't expect too many favours, and probably Malcolm Turnbull today didn't do too many other favours for Australia's cause when, of course, Donald Trump had to come out and give him a whack on Truth Social, his social media platform either.
Yeah, the fact that he reacted to it tells you it really got under the president's skin. Thanks, Ross.